Hello.
Good morning, Francis. How are
Good
you?
morning. You hear me perfectly fine?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great.
Welcome. And
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. So excited for this conversation. Full disclosure, I've taken lecture with you, so I am familiar with the material and look forward to experiencing again with our audience. So I will start by an introduction. So this is honoring Indian culture with in the modern yoga world with Sunaina, who goes by the pronouns they, them. Sunaina brings an invaluable perspective as a queer Indian immigrant that was raised in America. They fully embody their intersectional identity as a practitioner of yoga with a degree in physiology and deep understanding of mind-body connection. They are a humbling resource for their students. They value the importance of individuality within each student's practice and have carried these values in their teachings internationally. Their vinyasa is intentionally holistic and expands beyond asana to include breathwork, mudras, and cultural education. During their lectures, they encourage students to explore, to connect back to one's ancestors, and find practices that benefit oneself with respect and honor to the culture. Outside of their yoga teachings, Sunaina works in the pharmaceutical tech industry and also a professional model. As a practice of seva, a Sanskrit word for active service, Sunaina funds their family's school, Tom and Jerry Nursery, a school for children with special needs located in Bangalore, India. After completing one of the best 300 training sessions with Susanna Barkataki, who will actually be joining our community conversation with Sean Korn at 4 p.m. Eastern. So please come back and join for that. They are now 500 hours certified to teach, although yoga is a lifelong journey for them. I'm going to place the link for their Tom and Jerry Nursery Facebook page, as well as a link for donations in the chat. So what we're going to do is open it up for you to have this amazing presentation, and I will come back in about 10 to 15 minutes towards the end with a Q&A portion. So we invite the audience to please enter your questions in the chat, and so that we can have a nice conversation with Sunaina. So take the floor, Sunaina.
Thank you so much, Francis. Appreciate that a lot. Very well, warm welcome to everybody. Namaste. So my name is Sunaina, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. It really means a lot to me. A little bit about myself. I am an immigrant. I was lucky enough to gain my citizenship here when I was 16 years old, although I was raised in America the whole time. And a little bit about my practice and my family as well, my upbringing. So I was brought up in a fully Hindu household, practicing Hinduism very deeply with my parents and my grandparents as well. So for me, yoga is a little bit deeper than just a spiritual practice. It does involve a lot of religious aspects as well. So again, taking that into consideration as we have this conversation. Let's go ahead and drop in really quickly just to set the space, set the tone for the class today. So wherever you are, go ahead and just take a comfortable seated position. Maybe you're sitting on a ball like me. And roll your shoulders back. Very gently find one spot to gaze at or look at. And if it calls to you, if it feels comfortable and safe, you can close your eyes as well. And take a moment to just notice the energy in your body exactly as it is. And again, if it calls to you, placing your palms together in Anjali Mudra at your heart center, the mudra of offerings here. And take a moment to ground down through your feet, through your tailbone and your sit bones. Starting to deepen the breath. We'll take a moment here to acknowledge our teachers, our ancestors. Specifically for me, Saraswati Joyce of India, of the Ashtanga lineage, as I practice Ashtanga yoga quite often. I'd also like to invite into the space my grandmother, who has shared with me a lot of knowledge about yoga and the culture. And lastly, let's take a moment here to acknowledge the indigenous ancestral land underneath our feet. Currently in Denver, Colorado, I'm located on unceded Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne land. Acknowledging all of the people who had to come and cultivate this land in order for it to be this house, this space. And we'll close with 3 deep breaths and then the sound of my bowl here. So take a deep inhale through your nose, and then a deep exhale out of your mouth, releasing any noise, any energy. 2 more like that. Taking 1 last deep breath, filling up fully, and releasing fully. Beautiful. So, as we're talking about sacred objects, talking about honoring Indian culture, it's really important to note that the roots of yoga don't always necessarily have to start in India either. The roots of yoga start all over East Asia, from Pakistan to India to Nepal, Tibet, even North Africa and Egypt. And so understanding and honoring that yoga itself didn't just start from one specific place, but rather was a conglomerate of all of these places from Northern Africa all the way to India. But since I am Indian, we will be focusing more of honoring the culture from an Indian lens, especially because that was how yoga was brought over from the East here to the West by Swami Vivekananda as well. So again, keeping in mind that everything that we talk about, everything that we discuss here is from my perspective as an Indian American woman. And I never want to push you or tell you what to do or what not to do. Everything that I talk about is from my personal experience and is also it's very important to recognize and realize that, you have your own practice, right? Each one of us has our own practice, and we have to acknowledge and honor where we're at in our own journey. So where I'm at in my own journey is not going to be where you're at, or where your mother or your friend or your uncle, anyone else is at either, right? So while we talk about sacred objects, we first have to understand the power structures and the dynamics that go into the Western yoga world. So as we've kind of seen yoga evolve and become what it is today and be a really large, global, powerful force, we have to understand that there are different power dynamics in play. And as these power dynamics have gotten larger and larger, and we see the corporate yoga scene come into the picture, we understand and see that Indian people and folks of color and marginalized people have been pushed out of the mainstream yoga scene, and the focus has been predominantly white yoga practitioners. And when we talk about harm being done in the yoga space as well, we have material harm, which is harm that comes from, using sacred objects inappropriately or without honor. But then there's also that disrespectful harm as well, right? Of maybe not fully respecting the culture, maybe not understanding the culture, things like that. And all of that plays into the power dynamic that we have built here. So as we talk about the practices and the religion and all of these kind of aspects that intermingle, again, my perspective is yoga as a religion, right? Yoga as Hinduism for me, that's what it is. So that's my perspective. So the first thing I want to talk about specifically are deities and deity statues. So I'm sure all of you have seen maybe a Ganesha or a Saraswati or maybe even a Buddha, and sometimes they're placed in inappropriate places, whether it's in the studio or even in your house and even in your home. For example, I have walked into a studio before and seen a statue and a deity on the floor next to a shoe rack. And again, that is very disrespectful in Indian culture, and it's very important to treat these deities in terms of the statue itself as something that's really sacred and very, very important, because it's not just a statue, right? For me and my family, when I look at a deity statue, it embodies the real god or goddess, right? When I look at that statue, it's the real thing. So like if Ganesha was just sitting there in real life, what would he be saying? How would he feel about where he's placed, right? Kind of having that perspective. So I did bring just one statue here to share with you all. One of my favorite statues, if you can see, it's a Nataraja, the god of dance. And I have this statue specifically on my altar, and this is also a statue that you will see in a lot of yoga spaces. Nataraja is the epitome of opening, dancing, yoga, any kind of cultural and kind of artistic space. Nataraja should be there to bless it. And this is information that I actually just recently learned from my grandmother, who told me that in some traditions and in some cases in India, it can actually be a bad omen, I don't know how to say that, to have a Nataraja statue in your house. And it's important to, again, note that specific statues have specific places, right? And different types of traditions follow different rules as well. So making sure that if you are using deities and you are using statues, that you're doing so in a way that's respectful, you're cleaning them, they're not accumulating dust on them, and they have a very specific space. They're centered in the room, they're elevated, right? Because we want to be able to honor and truly respect these statues. So again, if you have any questions about deity statues, please go ahead and put them in the chat now. We will go ahead and move on to the next subject. So the next thing that I would like to talk about is still related to deities, but this time the appearance of deities on clothing. And I have also had a lot of experience with it, being in the fashion world and being in the fashion industry as well, seeing clothing that has Ganesha or Saraswati or even Sanskrit texts depicted on the clothing itself. And a lot of the manufacturers of this clothing are not Indian, and they also aren't actively giving back to the Indian community. And that's when it falls into the line of appropriation, right? When you're taking something from the culture and not honoring the roots, and also monetizing off of it without giving a little bit of that money back to the source culture. So again, being really aware of the clothing that we're wearing as we promote ourselves and as we promote yoga as well, making sure that we are not wearing any clothing that has Sanskrit on it unless you know what it's saying, unless you can speak fully about the god or the goddess that's on it. But again, if it's not, your own culture and your own source culture, I again can suggest staying away from that. The third thing that I would like to talk about is currently what I'm wearing here on my forehead. This is called a bindi. Bindi, bindi. And a bindi is a huge signifier of being an Indian or South Asian woman or person. Men can also wear bindis, especially nowadays. It's been a little more kind of lax with how things are going, but yeah, bindis are really important, and they have always traditionally marked a South Asian or Indian woman. And this is really, really important because it is a traditional marker of my culture and of my tradition and lineage, right? And it's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. It symbolizes your third eye chakra or your Agnya chakra located in between your eyebrows. And it also brings awareness constantly to this space in your forehead so that you're aware of your thoughts, you're aware of the energy going into your mind and how your mind is connected to the rest of your body, right? It's a very, very important part. Now, bindis I have seen in so many different in so many different ways. Specifically, the biggest example I can think of is Coachella, and using bindis as a fashion accessory, which also does happen in India as well, right? Like using bindis as a fashion statement does also happen within Indian culture. But again, the use of the bindi outside of that now, in the mainstream fashion world is predominant, right? We see it all of the time. We see people constantly just putting bindis on their forehead and and going out and taking photos, going to the club, going to dance parties, doing so many things like that. And we have to honor the fact that the bindi is a representation of South Asian and Indian cultures. Very, very important. Now, I want to just touch on the difference between appropriating a bindi and really honoring the bindi as a sacred object as well. When we honor the bindi, and if you're a non-Indian or South Asian person who has worn a bindi in specific cases, there's so many gray areas, right? And one of them is being invited into the culture by somebody of the culture. So I recently had an amazing time going to my good friend Deeplata, her wedding. And a bunch of our coworkers came along, and I had the honor of being able to dress them in saris and bindis, everything like that for the wedding ceremony. And in that case, it was totally okay and valid because I was the one who was allowing them to come into the culture, as well as the person getting married, right? It was her ceremony, and she wanted everyone to be in Indian attire to honor her ancestors as well. So in those cases, you know, they were invited into the culture and into the ceremony by somebody of this, by the someone of the source culture. So that is the third thing that I would like to talk about, which were bindis. Again, any questions about bindis, I would love to answer. Now, the next thing that I'd like to talk about is a symbol that we see quite often. I actually see this symbol a lot as a tattoo. Yep, as tattoos on people's bodies. I see this symbol hanging in yoga studios. I see it on tapestries, on clothing. I see it honestly all the time, and a lot of people may not know what it is. And that is the Om symbol, or Aum, A-U-M as well, Om. So I have a little Om here that you can check out. This one is actually from Bali. And the Om symbol, I would say, is the symbol of yoga. It is the symbol of unity. And it is a very, very powerful symbol. And it is used nowadays in a myriad of ways by people who may not even fully understand what Om is or what it represents. So I would just like to talk about that for a little bit. So there are 4 parts to the Om, and you can even see the 4 parts in the symbol itself. So you see this kind of 3, the Ah part. So that's the first part. And then we have the swirl, which is the Oo. And then this little U, like the aung, the ng, and then the resonant after, which is that little swirl at the top. So there are 4 parts to the Om. And the first one, which is the A, is the creation, right? It's the start of the sound vibration that starts at the very, very core of your belly. It starts all the way at the bottom and it moves up and then out of your mouth. That's the really beautiful thing about the Sanskrit language, is it's very phonetic, and it also reflects the meaning of the word as well. So the way you say it is reflective of the meaning. So the A in Om represents the creation of time, as well as the creator, right? That beginning point. Maybe you can think of it as the Big Bang. You can think of it as, you know, the larger universal creator creating the world, whatever you believe in terms of the original creation. And then you have the U part. Now the U is kind of sustained, right? It's longer, it's in the middle. And that is going to represent the sustaining part of our life, right? The whole journey from the creation all the way to the end. That's a huge chunk of our lives that's in that middle section, right? So honoring and understanding that Om that's coming up, that whole middle part, again, is that section of the swirl that goes into the bottom aspect here. So that's the sustaining of our universe, the sustaining of our own energy and our bodies throughout our life. And then at the very end, you have the M or the NG, the Aung, right? The very end. And that is, again, the destruction. So just like we had the creation at the beginning and then we sustained, the very end, we wither away and our energy gets reincarnated or retransferred back into either a higher plane or this plane or a lower plane, again, however you want to think of it. And then the very last part of the Om is actually the silence that comes after the vibration of the Om. So making sure that, again, when we see the symbol, when we're using the symbol, if we choose to do it, that we're doing so in a way that, again, honors the roots, honors the culture, and there's knowledge behind it, right? So if someone comes up to you and says, hey, like, I love that 32, it looks like a 32, I don't know what that is on your shirt, like, what is that? And then you can tell them that's actually the symbol and this is the history behind it. And there's more of a cultural exchange of information rather than, oh yeah, my yoga teacher has the symbol in her classroom, so I bought this t-shirt, right? So being very, very aware of the symbols that we're using, especially when it's in somebody else's source language and culture as well. So any questions about Om, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Alrighty. So that brings me to the end of the actual sacred objects that I would like to discuss today, because I just don't have that much time. But I do want to talk about other ways that we can truly honor Indian culture and the lineage of the Indian aspect and side of yoga here in the modern world. And one thing that I truly feel like has been lost has been the teachings of the yamas and the niyamas. So yama meaning restraint or control. The yamas and the niyamas are the first two steps in the eightfold path, in the eightfold step of yoga. And again, these have been lost because not everywhere, but in a lot of places, the main focus of the yoga practice is the yoga asana practice, the physical movement practice, right? And we know that yoga, again, going back to the root word of yoga, coming from yuj, which means to join, to come into union. And that, again, is your union with yourself to your higher self, right? Not the ego self, not the self that says, I'm Sunaina, I have curly hair, I'm wearing a bindi, all this stuff. Like, that's all the ego self. But I'm talking about the eternal uppercase self, right? The same self that's in each one of you, the same self that's in your plant, that's in your dog over there, in your cat, right? That life force energy that's ever pervading within us. That is the practice of yoga. So we get distracted, right? And we get attached. We get attached to relationships and objects and material things and non-material things and emotions. So the yamas and the niyamas really help us cultivate a sense of detachment. And detachment doesn't mean I don't care about anything and, whatever happens, happens. It means when you have this relationship with, the person or the object or whatever, when it doesn't necessarily work out as you were expecting, right? There's not a whole downfall of emotions and upset energy, and you're able to remain very neutral as you're able to control the mind more and more, and it starts to fluctuate. So regaining knowledge and practice of the yamas and the niyamas is essential to honoring the yogic lineage and tradition from an Indian perspective. Specifically, I do want to talk about one yama, which is satya. Satya. So satya means truth. Sat is truth. And it's not necessarily truth from a perspective, right? It's not just my truth or your truth, but it's the truth of, it's a universal truth, right? Of this moment as it is, from every single one of your perspectives, from my perspective, from the perspective of my table, from my computer, from my light, from my backdrop, all of these perspectives all coming into one and it creating a universal truth. And why is this necessarily important in the modern yoga world, right? Like, why do we need to cultivate the sense of truth? Because as we dive deeper into yoga studios and our asana practice and all of these things, we actually start to form more attachment and get further and further away from the real truth, right? The real truth of yoga being a practice for non-attachment. And truth can also manifest in a lot of ways. And even omitting the truth can be not in line with yoga, because omitting the truth is still untruth, it's still distruth, right? So if you go into a yoga studio and you think that everything that you know about yoga is only based off of the body, right? It's only about a movement, maybe it's about your breath a little bit, and that's all you know, right? And your teacher, your practitioner has never told you that there are these ethical values that are underlying to yoga that you have to have your foundation in order to have a better physical practice, right? Or even to have a better meditation practice or anything like that. You're serving yourself untruth. You're doing yourself a disjustice, right? Injustice. So always coming back to the yamas and the niyamas, and having your practice so solid in the yamas and the niyamas, that again, the foundation for your practice is the non-attachment that comes from the yamas and the niyamas and cultivating that. One other niyama that I would like to talk about. So again, niyama is roughly translate to your observance. So very environmental, your positive duty, like what you're supposed to do on your journey, right? And one niyama that also really stands out to me is swadhyaya. Swadhyaya. So swadhyaya is this concept of self-study and being able to always deepen your knowledge and always be a student of yoga, right? Never getting to a point where you step back and you say, I'm only teaching, I'm a guru, all of these things, but rather being more open to learning and learning from different positions. And that isn't always comfortable, right? Swadhyaya and doing your own self-work to learn is difficult, especially when, you're having a rough week or you're unmotivated or you're in the middle of this pandemic. Like, how many books are you going to read, right? Like, is that really in your priority list? Maybe not. But again, prioritizing these things and using the resources that you have to gain more knowledge. And also, in terms of swadhyaya, it's very important to understand and know that the most important relationship that you cultivate is, number one, your relationship with yourself, because it's your practice, and number two, your relationship with your teacher, right? You cannot go through this practice alone. It'll be very, very difficult for you. It's very, very important to find a teacher who understands you, knows what you're going through, and then has this mutual respect and wants you to grow, wants you to thrive, and is willing to help you on that journey of swadhyaya, willing to help you on the journey of self-study. Because in the end, regardless of if there's a studio or not, your practice is always going to be with you, right? It doesn't exist in a studio. It doesn't exist only on your mat. It exists all the time, infinitely, including in this moment and outside of it. So as we're talking about swadhyaya and the student-teacher relationship, I also want to mention the importance of cultivating a home practice. That's another way that you can honor the roots of Indian culture, is by, number one, being able to cultivate your own practice at home, right? Not limiting yourself to only the studio setting or limiting yourself only to physical asana. How are we on time? Okay. So as we solidify the yamas and the niyamas, I want to also emphasize that the 8-limbed path in yoga is not necessarily linear, right? We're not walking on the straight path like after I memorize all the yamas and I have them good, then I go to the niyamas and then asana and then pranayama and then it's not direct. It's kind of like a tree that has branches, and all of these branches blossom and bloom at different times. And it's really, really important to incorporate all 8 limbs of yoga, not just one, not just even the yamas and the niyamas. We always have to go beyond that to try and provide more than just the physical movement and more than just even the yamas and the niyamas, making sure that your teachers or the people who are guiding you are incorporating fully this holistic view of yoga, and doing so by honoring the root culture, right? Honoring the lineage, speaking about the teachers that you've had, giving your students resources, things like that. And if you are a student as well, holding your teachers accountable. I cannot stress this enough. I have been in so many spaces where I am the only person going up to the teacher after class and saying, hey, I felt a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit weird when this happened. Like, can you, or can you maybe give me more information about the history of yoga or where you learned it, or, the traditions and lineage that you follow, things like that. Making sure that you are going up to your teachers and asking them, right, for more than just physical movement. It is very important, especially in this day and age, to hold people accountable, hold them accountable to their highest selves. And again, saying that is really easy, but doing it and taking the action to really tell people, hey, like this is something that needs to change, and this is how I'd like to see it change, right? You have power as a student as well. So taking that into your hand. Okay, so I want to touch on 1 or 2 more things, and then I will open it up for questions. So one last thing that I do want to talk about, which is something that I feel like has kind of been not clearly outlined in my own yoga practice, that I wish I had known a little bit earlier, especially after talking to my family so in depth about my practice and my journey, has been how yoga and your yoga practice is really a tool that's preparing you for death, right? And it's important to talk about this because yoga isn't all love and light and positivity and all of these things, right? At the time of your death, your soul is going to come out of your body and be projected out. And wherever your attachments are, right? Maybe in the moment of your death, you're thinking about your dog and your family and your house and all of these things. Where's your soul going to go after? It's going to come back into this material world and be reattached, right? So again, knowing that your yoga practice isn't just a 1-month thing or a 3-month thing, it's a lifelong journey and a lifelong practice that, again, is a practice and a tool for death, because the very last limb, the 8th limb of the Eightfold Path, is samadhi, which is, again, being in union, right? Being in union with yourself. And a lot of times that comes when we die. So that is the last thing that I want to talk about before we open it up for questions. Yes,
we have a lot of questions. The chat was very lively.
Yay, happy to hear that.
It really does speak to the need for this conversation. So the first question I have was sent to me. I don't know if it's from Yana or someone within the chat, but what is the best resource to learning about deities and placement in the homes? So, for example, websites, links that you can recommend.
Yes. So I am always going to recommend, if you are using deities and statues and things like that, to always have somebody of the root culture who's opening that up to you. So for me, that was my grandmother. That was also some other Indian teachers I've had when I went back to Bangalore, and when I went back to India. So again, like, there's never going to be just like a blog, right? Like a blog post that's like, here, place your Ganesha to the left and place your Saraswati to the right and light your incense at 6:59 in the morning. Like, these traditions are passed down through my ancestors and through my family, and so also acknowledging and honoring that, right? Yeah.
So the next question is from Nick, and I apologize in the pronunciation. He wrote, how can we respectfully mount a thangka, Thangka?
A thangka. I am
go back to that. I don't know if that's how he spelled it. So I'm not sure. We can come back to that one.
Okay.
Jennifer asked, thoughts about intermingling statues and relics of different religions. For example, having a Ganesh near a Buddha and Christian cross in her home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, whatever serves you the best, right? It's your practice. So if you think that, you maybe grew up Christian and then you found Buddhism and then you found Hinduism later, and you really are a devoted practitioner and you actively pray to these gods and things like that, I always recommend setting up a specific space, like an altar or some kind of, again, sacred space that you have all of these objects on at one time, but also acknowledging and knowing that for you, these objects may just be spiritual objects, right? But for somebody else like me, if I walked into that space, it would be a religious artifact, right? It would be a little more than just like a spiritual object. It would be the real life form of Ganesha or of Saraswati sitting there. So I think, again, in my opinion, that's totally fine. But again, it's not my validation that you want. It's your own validation that you want, right? So turning back on yourself of, why do I feel the need to use these statues? Why do I feel the need to honor them or set up an altar for them? What do they bring me? Am I doing so in a way that's acknowledging the root and the culture? And do I have enough knowledge to do that, right? If somebody of the culture, if I walked into your house right now, right, and I saw your Buddha sitting on the shelf or sitting on the, maybe like next to the bookcase and stuff like that, how would that make me feel? And would that make you feel a certain way, right?
Yeah, makes sense. The next one is from Alicia. When I lived in India as a student, I remember being told that the red bindi is usually worn by married women. Is this true? I was given a colored bindi to wear for certain events.
Yeah, so like I said, bindis now in India have kind of, they're definitely taken on a more fashionable stance. Traditionally, there actually was powder that was used. So you have like a red and an orange powder that's used, and it's actually given at temples. So if you mix both of them, the red and the yellow, and you put it in your hairline here, you put it on your forehead, that signifies being married. And then if you're using red by itself, that can signify and I'm talking about the powder itself. If you use red alone, that can signify being single. And then if you use yellow by itself, that would signify being widowed. And again, these all differentiate upon different traditions and different lineages, right? So this is only true for what I know in my family and in my lineage. That's a great question, though.
The next comes from Yana. A common practice when people complete their YTT is being given a Sanskrit name by the teachers. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, great question. I love that. So That's a hard one for me. I think it would depend on the teacher, right? If there's a teacher who's Indian, who's of the culture of South Asian descent, and they again are giving you this name, and you've studied with them for 10 years, 15 years, right? And then there's a ceremony, and then you're presented this name, and this name again is only used in a specific setting, right? You're not going to go back to your family being named Bob, right? And then like say, hey, by the way, like this is my new name, this is my new identity, right? Like I think that there are some problems with that, and that also is a big token of appropriation for sure, because again, like those names are indigenous names, and even if they're given, like you can't be given a name at the end of a 200-hour course, right? Like that, for me at least, that doesn't fully add up and doesn't make sense of, okay, you've completed 2 hours of yoga training, and now we're going to present you with a whole nother name that's of the source culture. For me, I see a couple of red flags there. So I would say be a little cautious about that, right? If you've been practicing with a teacher for a very, very long time, and they know you, and in a deep meditative state, maybe they were called to then give you this name, it's going to be a little bit different.
Got it. Next is from Wanda Home Yoga. How do you, and this actually came up a few times in the chat, so the conversation around pronunciation or mispronunciation, how do you feel about instructors referring to concepts by their Sanskrit names within the context of a class, and how important is accurate pronunciation? And again, someone else answered, honoring the practice of names, words, and poses.
Yes. Oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm so glad this was brought up. Sanskrit is, like I said earlier, very phonetic, right? So the meaning of the word that you're speaking is spoken out loud, right? So like even as I say, like for example, like I'm like Trikonasana, right? Trikonasana, so triangle pose. Even as I'm saying that whole word, Trikonasana, it's coming out, and it's literally saying, as I'm saying the word, how to do the pose, what the pose is supposed to feel like, what the pose is supposed to be like as I'm speaking it. So when I'm mispronouncing it or saying it wrong, you actually could be saying something else, or you could be just, again, I would say that's a part of honoring the culture, is being able to pronounce it correctly, definitely. But also when you're using Sanskrit in class, make sure that you're translating your Sanskrit, right? Don't say Trikonasana and then nobody knows what you're referencing and no one knows what you're saying, right? Like make sure that your teachers are saying triangle pose, also known as Trikonasana, right? So that there is some kind of translation between the English word and the Sanskrit word, and that translation is clear.
And I think that's an interesting conversation, because as someone whose English is my first language, but I also speak Spanish, so the way certain letters roll off my tongue are different. So it can be confusing with words like mudras. It's like, is it mudra? Is it mudras? Is it, which is easy for me to say, but now am I making it
and even within India, if you go to North India, the way that they speak and pronounce Sanskrit is going to be completely different than if you go to South India. And because my mother tongue is Tamil, that's what I speak at home. And everyone in my family, again, when they pronounce Sanskrit words, it's so different than what I've learned even from some teachers that I've had, from some Sanskrit teachers that I've had who are from North India. So there's a lot of variance. So again, the most important thing, if you are learning Sanskrit, is learning from a teacher of the culture, learning Sanskrit from someone who's South Asian or Indian, or who has a very deep understanding and practice of it.
Got it. Aaron Wilbanks Fuson. Any tips on finding a teacher you align with, especially in COVID times when going to a studio isn't the safest idea? And sorry if I butchered your name, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes you're going to have to search around too, right? Like it's not always going to be that simple of finding one teacher and then sticking with them forever, because a lot of teachers nowadays, with yoga being a whole industry, right? People aren't necessarily focused on having a very singular student to teacher relationship. And so to even find teachers like that, it is difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy, but yeah, I would say find teachers of the lineage. There is a lot of resources on Instagram, of course. There are, the Yoga is Dead podcast. They have a whole page actually of resources. And I'm pretty sure on their page they have I think it's a ABC, what is it? Let me just look on Instagram really quick. It's the, hold on, here we go. Yep, it's ABCD Yogi. And they also have a lot of South Asian resources as well. But yeah, a lot of people have been going online now, so it is a little bit easier as well with that, especially with COVID. Please, y'all, don't go into studios. Be safe. Wear a mask if you do go in, and yeah, hopefully the studios have open windows and they're a little ventilated. But I know that there have been some unsafe studio stuff going on. So
this is another question that comes up a lot, and it is from Lori Cooper K. Could you speak about the controversy of saying namaste at the end of class?
Yes. Yes. So there's two things. The first one is the pronunciation, right? Like we had just talked about. So there's the whole namaste, which is the incorrect pronunciation of it. And then there's namaste. Namaste. Okay, so that is going to be the correct pronunciation of it. And as we're talking about even namaste and using it, it's important to note that it is used traditionally as a greeting. So if you go to India, it is always said in the beginning of seeing someone. Now in India, it's a kind of a different story, right? Like namaste is used all the time. It's hi, bye, how are you doing? What's going on, right? It's used a lot, but predominantly to say hi, and to greet people. Anjali Mudra, again, is an offering, right? When you place your hands together like this, you're making an offering to yourself and to the other person as well. Now, as we kind of decode namaste, it's also used with elders, right? It's used as a respect thing as well. So it's used when meeting or greeting an elder within the community. It's used at the temple when you see the priest, and it again is always to you, right? So there's no, the light within me is the light within, there's nothing about light. Namaste has nothing to do with light. Okay. So let's clarify that really quickly. But again, namas means reverence, adoration, or salutation. So that's the reverence part. And then te is for you. So namaste is reverence, adoration, salutation to you. Right? So there's no me, there's no light. And there's also a longer version of it, which I use within my family, which is namaskaram. And that's like the longer version of namaste. And also, when we end class with namaste, it also kind of puts in a power dynamic, right? Where like everybody is on the edge of their seat and they're kind of like waiting for the teacher to say it, right? The teacher like comes and their hands are closed and then everybody feels like they have to say it back and bow back. And it does kind of create a power dynamic as well. So I would say if you are going to use it, if you really feel attached to using it, number one, why do you feel the need to say it at the end of class? And did you know this information, right? Like, did you know what namaste meant? And also, are you pronouncing it correctly? Are you saying namaste? Are you saying namaste all the time? Or are you saying namaste? And are you attached to it, right? This whole practice of yoga, again, is a practice of detachment and non-attachment. So if you're feeling all these feelings about not being able to say namaste at the end, again, that's a sign to turn inward and look inward.
So we have a few more minutes, and this last question might open up a longer conversation. So I think this will probably be the last one, and it is from, I know I wrote it down because it was a good, okay, Michaela Thorne. I'm sorry, I don't want to be to disrespect you or the culture. Basically, how do you balance religious differences and respecting all aspects of yoga?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that yoga is not religious, but religions can incorporate yoga, if that makes sense. So, and again, this is just from my perspective. So regardless of your religion, I would say the point of religion in general is to achieve yoga, right? Is to be one with yourself, to be whole with yourself. That's why religions exist to begin with. That again is my perspective. But if there are religious differences, you can always ask yourself the question, like, is this bringing me closer to myself? Is this bringing me closer to my values? Is it aligning with my values? And if any of those answers are no, then it's not serving your higher self, right? So this balance of religious differences, again, is nothing more than within you and within yourself. So always turning inward for the answer, because that's where the answers are always going to be, nowhere else. I can't give them to you. And yeah, I mean, even your teachers to some extent, right? Like we can only hold space for you to do the work yourself.
Yeah, and this is why we have these conversations, so that we can continue to learn, because it was from my initial lecture with you that it kind of opened up my mind to just learning, right? And learning why I do what I do, why I have the things that I have, and am I appropriating and learning about the culture. So thank you so much, Sunaina. What we're going to do is we've added, but we will add again the link to follow you on your Instagram, but also the link to your family's nursery school. And for donations, we'll also add the link to that as well. And it's wonderful. It's always wonderful to lecture with you and to learn from you.
Blessings, Frances. Thank you, everyone, for your energy and time.
And the chat is just, I mean, this has been one lively chat today. It's really all these comments of thank you and how necessary this conversation is.
I love it.
I know Anna was on here, and she'll be back this afternoon continuing.
Yes, I can't wait for that talk. I will leave you all with one quote. I just have one last thing for you.
Thank you.
It's from the Bhagavad Gita, and it also is quoted in Susanna's book, Embrace Yoga's Roots, this one. So it's like one of my favorite quotes from the Bhagavad Gita. And it says, "Do every action you must do, and do not be attached to your actions' fruits. Self-possessed, resolute, act without any thought of results, open to success or failure. This equanimity is yoga. Do not be attached to inaction. This skill in action is yoga." And that's Bhagavad Gita 2.47.
Thank you so much, Sunaina.
So welcome.
And hopefully
Blessings.